Prior to this episode, my mother claims that I'd always been a little bit mental since the day I was born. According to my mother, I used to tell her that people were coming before they came, and they would show up, or tell her that so-and-so would be calling, and they would call a few minutes later. As a child, I recall experiencing numerous out-of-body experiences. Of course, I had no idea what it was, and I never mentioned it to anyone. My mother always believed I was a weird child and never supported my eccentric conduct. On the opposite, I believe it gave her the creeps. I stopped making these episodes because of that, or so I believe. Aside from the aforementioned incidents, I've always had complete memory of all of my dreams each and every night. Every night of my life has been like this. Throughout my life, I've seen numerous visions. Native Americans are not rare in having visions. However, some of us spend our entire lives hoping for just one. I've been fortunate enough to have had several. Those that did not make sense before have now become evident as a result of my life experience. Other than the fact that I'd been a chronic pain patient for almost 3 years, I don't recall anything leading up to the surgery. I lost my job, which I really enjoyed, due to the severity of my condition. 95% of the last 3 years have been spent in bed owing to pain with significant depression. I was passed from one specialist to the next in an attempt to figure out what was wrong with me. Finally, after 3 years of excruciating pain, I was admitted to the hospital, where it was determined that I had pelvic floor problem as a result of a previous surgery's pelvic mesh implant. You know, the one you keep hearing about on TV. The transvaginal mesh lawsuit. That's right. The mesh and bone-in anchors had to come out. The mesh and bone anchors were to be removed during surgery on July 10, 2013. It was meant to be a 2-hour procedure, and I was expected to be able to go home immediately afterward. I went to the hospital with my sister, who accompanied me the entire time. Prior to the procedure, I don't recall anything. I recall waking up with my sister watching over me. She had a look on her face that I'd never seen before. It was a blend of affection and genuine terror. When I questioned where I was, she told me I was in the intensive care unit. I ended up having 2 major procedures in the space of 5 days. I'm not sure which of the 2 was the location of my life after life encounter. I'm going to describe both hospital experiences first, and then the life after life experience that my sister informed me about later that night, as she had to watch me slip away from life on more than one occasion. What had become of my 2-hour in and out surgery? It took longer than planned. In her whole experience, the surgeon was able to remove the largest single piece of mesh. She was also able to remove both bone anchors. However, something had gone awry, causing my blood pressure to dip to 30 many times. My sister compared it to watching an episode of Grey's Anatomy, with doctors hurriedly shrieking "Code Blue." They were quite concerned about me developing renal failure, whatever that was. Anyway, I was in the ICU for a long time. I was relocated to another room after I was steady. Later in the day, I was eventually released. I had 5 days at home. On July 15, I started having terrible stomach pain. I was alone at home. My husband was at the drugstore getting my pain relievers. I was doubled over in pain and unable to get to my bed. I needed to go to my phone, but I was in so much pain that I couldn't think clearly. I didn't know where my cell was. It rang, and I heard it. The noise came from my bedroom. I moved in the direction of the sound. It was my sister who called. I attempted to tell her about my pain, but I couldn't. She instructed me to hang up and dial 911. I did. Paramedics were standing over my bed the next thing I recall. The next thing I remember is being carried on a stretcher out of my house. The sky above was breathtaking, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The hurt. I never imagined the human body could feel or be in as much pain as I was. I wished for someone to murder me. Please? I begged to die. In anguish, I screamed aloud. I was pleading with the paramedic to give me a catheter. Something was horribly wrong. I desperately wanted to urinate, but I couldn't. I was taken by EMS to a hospital about 8 miles away. When I arrived, they thankfully gave me a catheter and performed a CT scan. They informed me that I had a bladder cramp, which may be excruciatingly uncomfortable. I'm not kidding. The CT scan revealed that I had suffered internal bleeding as a result of the procedure. They had cut the aorta. The hospital didn't want anything to do with me, so they loaded me back into the ambulance and drove me back to the hospital in the middle of the night across the Bay Bridge. I awoke in surgery once more. This time, the surgeon stated that he needed to stop the vein leak. It had been cut by mistake during the prior surgery. Everyone on the surgical team told me how fortunate I was to be alive. I would not have phoned an ambulance if it hadn't been for the bladder cramp and its onset. I would have dozed off and never woke up. Internal bleeding had kept me at home for 5 days. Nobody knew. As I recovered in the hospital after the surgery, I was taken aback by the staff members' well-wishers. Everyone on the floor, including the nurses, cleaning crew, assistant, and physicians, kept telling me how lucky I was to be alive. Only, I seemed to understand that luck had nothing to do with it. God has complete control and is everywhere at the same time. This is not a sentence I expect to have previous to my event. I slowly, peacefully, and effortlessly exited my body. At first, I began a leisurely ascent through a semi-dark tunnel towards a distant light. I could see the silhouettes of 2 men on the left side in the distance. The one on the far left was taller than the other. A considerably shorter person stood directly next to him. As I got closer, I realized the big figure on the left was my grandfather, and the tiny one next to him was my great-grandmother. I couldn't pick out any of their characteristics. They were all silhouettes or shadows. A brilliant light shone from behind them both. I was to come to a halt and not proceed any further. There were no voices that I could hear. I was designed to grasp this. I was not permitted to approach any closer. I wasn't prepared. More crucially, I was informed that I had not done enough good in my life to be permitted to join them. I need to do a lot more good. I must return. I spun around. I was halted as I began my descent. 2 families were shown to me. On my left was a family. This was the family I knew. This was the family I was born into. My right side was occupied by the other family. It was a large family with far more members than the family to my right. I had to make a choice. Which family did I want to return to? The one on my left or the one on my right? I recall that this was not a hasty decision. I deliberated for some time before making my decision. I finally chose to return to the family with whom I'd grown up. This is exactly what I did. I eventually recovered consciousness. What follows might fill a novel, as it is miracle after miracle after miracle. Not just to myself, but to everyone around me, including my dog and plants. I'm continually receiving signals from God, day after day, minute after moment. I've been gifted with a wealth of specialized expertise. I've been assured that I'll just need one more surgery. This will take place on November 13th. After I recover from the surgery, my life is set to become tremendously hectic. My husband and I were heading to San Francisco to meet my sister and mother for lunch before going to my doctor's appointment. We were early, and I'd been in the car for 1.5 hours, which was challenging and unpleasant for me in and of itself, let alone the fact that I needed to use the restroom badly. Because we were ahead of schedule, I begged my husband to pull over at the hospital because we were in the area and to let me run in and use the restroom. After all, it's better than using the restroom at a gas station. Anyway, I got out of the truck with my walker and headed to the hospital. When I was finished, I returned to where my husband had dropped me off, but he was nowhere to be found. So I rested my walker against the wall and waited. I can't stand for more than 5 minutes without feeling severe pain. The ache caused me to shake. I was forced to stand for much too long. It was too much for me to bear. I became dizzy from the agony. I started making my way back into the hospital's main door because I knew if I didn't sit down right now, I'd pass out from the pain. The woman at the information booth inquired whether I was okay and if I needed assistance. Yes, I need assistance, I replied. I required a wheelchair. I answered yes, and then passed out from the pain. They barely made it under me in time, but they did. I was semi-conscious at the time. I sagged in my chair as they wheeled me into and towards the emergency room, or ER. The nurse at the ER window was attempting to gather information from me when we arrived, but I couldn't talk. I was now experiencing a massive explosion in my chest. It felt like a time bomb had exploded in the middle of my chest. The next thing I knew, the entire left half of my face had fallen, particularly my lips. My left arm and leg did as well. I was unable to move anything on my left side. Worse, I couldn't speak. I had no identification on me because I'd been dropped off to use the restroom. My poor husband must have been sick with concern because he had no idea what had happened or where I was. Neither did my mother nor my sister, whom we were meeting for lunch. I was ultimately placed in a hospital bed by the personnel. I was still unable to talk. When the doctor arrived and determined I had most likely had a stroke, all hell broke out. He then summoned another doctor, and then another. They started asking me questions that were tough to respond with only the right half of my lips. I remember tears streaming down my cheeks. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. I was completely unafraid. I only felt love. I merely felt calm. I felt nothing except thankfulness. I was extremely fortunate. Who gets to have a stroke in one of the best hospitals in the country? Despite the fact that all of my symptoms were witnessed by all of the physicians, they could not detect anything wrong with me. Nothing at all. My heart was fine. My head was fine. Everything was fine. As I previously stated, my life has altered dramatically and continues to do so as a result of my experience. There's simply too much to say. I'm thinking about publishing a book or starting a blog because I have so much to say and feel obligated to share the messages that are coming my way.